All right, welcome. This is Serverless Office Hours. He's still dancing. I was going to call it out that during the countdown music, Tim was dancing, which was a little surprising and a lot startling. So that was really cool. Hey, welcome to Serverless Office Hours. If you've never seen this, we do this every Tuesday. This channel. And it's always about serverless. This is a serverless office hours, so you get to ask any question you want, and I'll throw it at these guys. It's like stump the chump, right? And so we'll see how they do. But what I'm going to do now, let me introduce who who's joining me today. As you notice, I am not Julian. Julian has hair, period. I do not have hair. I believe this is better looking, but really this is not a choice. So there you go. So yeah, appreciate that. Luca, you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah,
So there
exactly.
you go. Yeah, exactly. Tim and Giedrius with your hair.
Yeah, getting there.
Whatever. Yeah, exactly. So today we are going to, well, I'm going to let y'all introduce it. Luca, first of all, introduce who you are and what you do, and we'll go around, then I'll let you introduce what we're talking about today.
So hi, everyone. My name is Luca. I'm a serverless specialist. I'm based in London, UK, because I know that there are also other London cities over the world, so better to say UK. So I usually help customers on serverless with my colleagues in here, UK and Ireland. And also, I'm quite passionate about communities, so I'm trying to give back what I'm learning through talks, books, or articles.
Nice. All righty. Tim, talk about you. Who are you and what do you do?
My name is Tim Coulson. I am a senior technical writer in the AWS serverless group. And after decades of doing monolithic, non-serverless stuff, the last couple of years now, I've been learning serverless and just really digging it. And not only that, but writing with these folks, another group of solution architects, on workshops for practical hands-on things, because I like to get my hands into code. But I've also written for AWS Lambda, and I put together this serverless guide, developer guide, to try and condense 6,000 some pages of core docs into like 65 or 70. So that's what I do.
Well done. That's crazy to me, and I know you do a lot of that. And I have stories, but we'll come back to them. Giedrius, tell us who you are and what you do.
I'm a serverless solutions architect. I focus on serverless, as name says, and I work with global strategic accounts along with Luca and other SAs, helping and pretty much solving technical problems and guiding customers.
Nice. All right. So basically what we just heard is we have a panel of experts here today. And we're going to be talking about something really cool. We're going to talk about serverless patterns, but not the serverless patterns that you see in serverless land. This is a little different. And Luca, why don't you tell us, before I destroy it, why don't you tell us exactly what it is?
Yeah, so sure. I like to start with a story because I think storytelling is extremely powerful. So let's start with was my first reInvent as an employee. I did like 4 reInvent as a customer, and then I joined AWS a few years ago. And then the first reInvent, I was talking with our worldwide leader in serverless, Josh Kahn. Ciao, Josh. Basically,
Cheers,
we were talking about let's say how I can help to the serverless TFC. So we have a technical field community in AWS, and I was working in another team before joining the specialist. And one thing that he was raising was on a workshop that potentially could work more on the architecture side. And because architecture is one of my main, let's say, expertise, and also because I'm quite passionate about the topic, I immediately jumped into the boat, and I started to lead a bunch of other SA, and we started to design this workshop the following year, because reInvent is happening usually towards the end of the year. And it was a very nice journey because we take our time and trying to focus more on what kind of challenges our customers are facing. Because as you mentioned before, Eric, we started to look into architectural patterns more than services and how they glue together very well. And we look at, let's say, the classic challenges that we are facing. So how to create a synchronous API, how to use idempotency, and so on and so forth. And we try to design a workshop that was modular enough that allowed us to work in parallel like an organization would do. And moreover, we are trying to, let's say, capture all the challenges that our customers are facing that are not only how to write infrastructure as code, but also how to do testing, how to do a CI/CD, how to use different infrastructure as code languages. So in general, our goal with this workshop was slightly different from others, where we started to look at a specific point and solve with services. We start to look instead of a business system that could be, in our case, more a sort of Deliveroo that we have in UK or Grubhub that you have in US. So these kind of problems that can let's say, be resolved and implemented using serverless services. And that was basically our starting point for this workshop.
Excellent. You know, it's interesting. You kind of alluded to it a little bit. It's interesting with serverless. You know, when you talk about EC2, right? And no, Eric didn't just say that's serverless, right? That's that. But no, I didn't. So you're all going to report that back to Chris Munns or something. But if you talk about EC2, you pretty much talk about EC2, right? That's the service, right? And then you got VPs and things like that, but that's where everything is. Serverless is different, right? With serverless, we're like, you know, buses are here, queues are here, and you're abstracting a lot of that stuff out of code into architecture, and it makes patterns really critical on how to on a pattern that I ran in code. How if I'm blowing that out to services, that I mean, the advantages are more resilience. You know, we can go through all that. I'll let you guys cover that. But we're blowing that out. It's a much different way of looking at that. And so, rather than talking about, and James Bezic and I talked about this a long time ago. Rather than talking about services, hey, this is Lambda, this is what it does. Although that's important, we're talking about how do the architectures work and how do we build applications. So I love that y'all are doing this. We've got some hellos and highs. AJ Struvenberg. I know I say your name wrong, AJ. You can, you know, give me a whack on the head in that reInvent. Capizzi, hello, how are you? Tell us where you're watching from. We have quite a few viewers out there, so we'd love to hear where you are. And remember, throw in your questions and we'll ask them. But let's jump into this program. And Tim, are we going to you next?
Sure. Why not?
Tell me where you want to go, and we'll go there.
How about if I go and just show a real quick screenshot of what we've been talking about? Luca's been talking about the patterns. I love that idea of the hands-on stuff because, as I mentioned, I'm very much, you're going to see me just doing this all the time.
I don't know if I haven't broke it. If I haven't broken it, I don't know it. That's so, yeah, hands-on is important. So, all right, let's bring in. I'm going to bring in your screen. You ready?
Bring in that screen. Go ahead. All right. And actually,
I asked because, you know, are you looking at your bank account or something like that? So we have to.
I got the Serverless Patterns workshop up there.
All right.
And you know, actually, I'm gonna sneak in this slide real fast in front of everybody. Those patterns that Luca was talking about. This diagram on the right, well, my right, I don't know, left, right, whichever it is. Luca did this. It was brilliant. It took the practical scenario and broke it into these components of the architecture into really high-level chunks, and that's Tim, where.
I'm already going to interrupt you. Can you blow that up a little bit? Go ahead and make that full screen so we can see it. Yeah. When you're streaming, it can be kind of small. Thank you, sir.
Sorry.
I won't interrupt you again until the next time.
No. Exactly. The next time, do. But these patterns that, you know, they're really high level. And the one thing that you were talking about, Eric, I've been doing development for a couple decades. And, you know, as an app kind of thing, that paradigm shift, multiple, you have to go ahead and think about taking that app and breaking it apart into these pieces is something that I've been learning from these guys a lot about how to architect and do that. And seeing these, you know, big high level patterns that emerge and how to actually practically create them has been extremely helpful for me to make that transition and figure out, okay, these are the big chunks. And so in that workshop, which reveal there, is the serverless patterns that we're talking about there right at the top. It's about building this app. And actually, I'm going to go down to the project itself. Luke had mentioned all these are around a practical scenario of a delivery, food delivery kind of thing on e-bikes. And so all of the processes and stats and plans are based around these kind of real scenarios, which I really like because it gives me something to ground what's being done in the workshop with what's going to happen then in code. And over here on the left right now, we've got this intro to serverless for folks that have really just kind of, I mean, there's a lot of paradigms in here. That's the thing that I think, we think about this, if you've done serverless, as being really basic and easy. But, when I came in, again, decades of development, I'm like, wait a minute, I've got to break this up apart into these components and these things. And at first it felt like, well, why? And then as I learned more, I'm like, oh, there's so much flexibility. There's so much scalability. There's so many advantages of having API gateway handle inbound stuff and having your compute in Lambda and having your database separately and serverless and able to scale. But then how to put those together. Giedrius has done a remarkably amazing job. I got to give him credit, shout out, on module 2. It is so in-depth, deep dive on how to really practically do this architecture with authentication, with JWT, and put all the pieces together in an architecture and shows you how to do it. So that, and the last thing I'll say before I'll shut up until I keep talking again, is that down here in the dive deeper, we've got a couple more modules already for using Application Composer, which I know you did a session on, and it's really kind of an interesting new way to put these things together. And we've got practical loading of not just the same, but some CSV loading with Application Composer, how you would do that in a practical kind of manner. And then the CI/CD pipelines that show you how to put all this together and get your source code changes to end up in your builds. All the things as a developer I'm excited by, because I'm like, these are the things as a developer and architect that I need to know and I need to know how to do. And that's what's in this workshop. And then
so I love this
shameless plug.
Yeah, no.
If you click over here in the Serverless Developer Guide, that's where the guide is with these paths and the stuff that kind of gets you started in some of these services. So shout out to Lambda. Hey, Lambda folks, it's a phenomenal service, and this is going to help you understand that too. So there we go. I'll go back now.
No, you're great. I love this. In what we're getting here, and Giedrius and Luca, you can tell me if I'm wrong, and Tim, but one of the things I hear a lot from folks is, how do I do this? Right? I mean, we all hear that. How do I do this? How do I do A? How do I do B? How do I do C? And the general answer, and maybe it's just me, but the general answer is, well, it depends. There's quite a few ways to do this, right? And so that's a lot of times what we answer. I love it. I think sometimes what developers tell me is, I don't want 100 ways. I want you to tell me the best way. I want you to tell me what your opinion is, and that's what y'all have done here, yeah.
Yeah, and as Tim and Luca mentioned already, it has all those components, and it's not just typically we would finish. Let's say when we go into workshop, we typically finish. Okay, now you built it. You build this end-to-end architecture or pattern, and you're done. This one goes, and then this kind of framework or mindset. We need to go further. We need to show what's next. We need to show how does it really look like in enterprise environment. It's not going to be like you left it and then now try to figure out all the scaffolding around. So it has built-in observability. It is, let's say, you have dashboards with business metrics, with system, with operational metrics as part of your infrastructure as code. You have CI/CD pipelines. You have messaging. What happens if, let's say, DynamoDB provision concurrency is not if Lambda provision concurrency is not there, or if you are hitting some limits, do you get any messages? Do you get any messages in case of errors? So all that observability, all CI/CD pipelines, all that is built in, and you have this end-to-end experience. So that's one. Each module, and Tim already showed next module that is coming, and also on the first page you have an entire list of modules that are coming. All those patterns that are listed there, they are coming. They are in active development, so they will be published quite soon. We are kind of developing it in not exactly in open, but at least our roadmap is published there. And all of them follow the same principles, that it has to be end-to-end pattern. You should be able to start at any point in that workshop. You don't have to follow through all the patterns, let's say 3 modules first before you reach module 4 that you're interested in. Any of them can be started right from the beginning. You can jump in at any point. And also it's small end-to-end application, as I mentioned. all the scaffolding, unit testing, integration testing, observability, all that is in place. So you can take those lessons learned and apply them in practical world in your development environment.
So, well, and that exactly goes back to what, if you see me looking away, I'm kind of do social stuff.
Yeah.
Well, I told these guys just to kind of give them a preparation here. I look down when I type, so I'm not sleeping if I'm doing this. I promise I'm not. If you're watching me, guys, is there sleeping or what? So, yeah, I'm not. But so, all right. So
Harry.
let's count. Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, may I add one thing that I think is important to highlight, considering that we are talking about architecture and serverless, that is quite a key thing. So I think usually the challenge I have seen customers facing is the concept of modularity, because very often they express modularity at the code level, and they are thinking, okay, so now I'm using I don't know, web framework, my favorite web framework, Spring Boot, or I don't know, Fastify, Node Word, etc. But the reality is, when you think about serverless, you have a different mindset where you are expressing modularity at the infrastructure level. This seems obvious, but it's not that much. So I've seen that failing very often, because they tend to think, oh, now it's complex. The reality is you are expressing exactly the same thing you're doing with code, or very similarly, through infrastructure. And that is a big shift of mindset. And I think this workshop might help on that, because certain things, for instance, that before you tend to do everything synchronous, and therefore you have a container that is calling another container, and maybe because you don't want to have external dependency inside the team, and you don't want to bother the platform team, you don't want to use a queue or whatever, you try to solve with what is under your control. Now with serverless, instead, you can express a same bounded context in different ways. You can have a portion that is just synchronous, and then the rest is completely asynchronous. And how to express that is fantastic, in my opinion, that very often we don't highlight this thing, because probably for us now it's also, let's say, part of our life, but the reality is for many it's not. And therefore thinking indeed that modularity, and I think is at least for me, it was the way how I describe, and I've seen people and my talks resonating very well with this concept, this the expression of modularity that is happening at the infrastructure level starts to create a map, mental model that maps into the normal way how you express into code. Because in one side, maybe you do in-memory, let's say, caching that maybe is happening not with I don't know, Redis or Memcache or whatever, you're just doing in code, and maybe with Lambda you want to use something different, or you want to orchestrate certain parts. And then here we have step function. And there is one thing that I believe is very, very important, that you need to basically leverage the work of hundreds of engineers that are working on these services, that are making them stable for you, and removing the undifferentiated heavy lifting. That very often we forgot about that, because we think, oh, it's slightly different, therefore is more complex. It's not that it's more complex, it's just that we need to wire our head towards this modularity that is not happening anymore in the code, and therefore is removing the complexity for us to handle, because every line of code means multiple tests that we need to run, and that test is going to run every single commit. It's not something that you just write the code and forget about that. You have basically a lot of stuff that can be removed, because we already done that for you. And that's something that I wanted to highlight, because very often we forgot to say, and probably is the most basic thing that someone can say, but I think is extremely powerful.
I couldn't agree more. I was chuckling as you were talking about it, because a lot of times I've had, we show folks in architecture. Here's your 17 lambdas, whatever, things like that. And they kind of get overwhelmed. Oh, that's a lot of architecture. But then when you explain, yeah, but these represent functionality in your code. You couldn't see this in your code as well as you can see it here. And so you start seeing this kind of breakout and very visual. And I love this idea. I mean, serverless by nature is visual when you think about, okay, I have these Lambda functions that are happening. I have this orchestrator happening over here. I'm doing a bus, I'm doing a queue, I'm doing a topic, whatever. And so as I lay those out, and so you see that and it becomes very apparent. Okay, I see how this is flowing. The other part of it that I absolutely love, when you get the serverless pattern down, I'm going to dive into the workshop in a little bit. I have some questions about how y'all are approaching this, and so they're not like, "Why are you doing it this way?" They're like, "Hey, why are you doing it this way? This is cool." So maybe they'll be a little that way, but no, I'm just kidding. But when you think about when you get the serverless pattern in place, this is one of the things that when I talk, I do this a lot. You show this, hey, let's even jump back out of serverless and say event driven for a moment, right? So when you get this event driven serverless, AWS didn't invent EDA, but we sure made it easier. With serverless, we made it just massively easier. And when you think about this EDA pattern using serverless, once you have it in place, look, when this event happens, I'm going to do this. And I don't know, Luca, have you ever heard me define EDA?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'd love to hear it again.
For those in the audience who haven't heard it, this is the technical part. This gets pretty deep, but I'm going to do it. So, Giedrius, are you with me? Here it is.
Yeah.
Okay. Giedrius looks a little skeptical. I'm going to be really honest.
No.
Here's how we define EDA. Yeah. Here's how we define EDA. Something happens, and we react. There it is. That's event-driven architecture. It's that simple. That's a little oversimplified, but this idea of setting up a pattern of this happens and this, then we can continually build on top of that pattern. I'm not having to find lines of code. I'm not having to remember, oh my gosh, where in my project is that happening? I just drop in another event and have it target another, something happening. So, all right. So we do have a question coming in. Can we break for a question? All right. I'm going to throw it up there. I haven't even read it yet. We're just going to go for it. Hey, can you suggest a pattern to update something in DynamoDB as well as in S3 from a Lambda? What if any one of the operation? What if any one of the operations failed? Then how to make sure the system is not left in a consistent state? Anybody want to throw on that one?
The outbox pattern. So the outbox pattern is used for dealing with transactional situation like the one that you are describing here. And basically the idea behind that is that you have a table where you are, let's say, dropping to these outbox the effective write into an SNS topic, an S3 bucket, or whatever it is. And every operation that you do, you track into the table. So therefore, you know exactly what it passes and what it doesn't. And therefore, when you know that, it means that you are in a situation that you can check what failed and then make it consistent again. And that is something that I have followed several customers, who, especially when they are migrating, maybe they are expanding their EDA architecture and they want to move from one. Recently, I had a customer that had like one SNS topic and he wants to move to multiple of them because now they want to have, there was a startup that was growing very fast. And therefore, they wanted to move in multiple domains. So having a topic per domain, that is quite common, to be honest. And the outbox pattern allowed them to have every single producer sending to these composition of a DynamoDB table and Lambda function for writing in the existing topic and the new topics. And that basically allow them to track what was working, what wasn't, and also doing this migration. And that was from finance. Therefore, their data were extremely important. They couldn't lose a transaction from a credit card or stuff like that, because otherwise was really a problem. So moving to, let's say, a knowledge of pattern, expressing them into serverless was for them a breeze, because when we started to discuss exactly the similar question, we started to look into the options, and that allowed them to have visibility, because they can always check in a single place inside the DynamoDB table what was going on, and also having the implementation was replicable. So they could take that, develop one in a centralized team, and say every single team that is producing event can use this template in Terraform or CDK or SAM, wherever they were using. Sorry, I don't remember. And then they can replicate that with little implementation. And I think is one of the benefits of having a modularity that is expressed at the infrastructure level over code. Because if you think about that, then depends from the language that you have. You need to create a package, you need to maintain the package, and so on and so forth. So there are different type of complexity. I cannot say simpler or more complex, but the type of complexity I think is different.
Awesome. So we had feedback to see get your thought on this. Says I feel like the outbox pattern is basically using the database as a queue. What are your thoughts on that? And Giedrius, you can jump in as well, or Tim.
Yeah, I would say it's database. You're using that as a checking in your job status, basically, or journaling. If you go back to, let's say, the operating system or database implementation underneath, you would be journaling your job status and making sure that you always can step back. Now,
Yep.
one more variation of that implementation, if we step back from event-driven, step functions. Initial question was about DynamoDB and S3 in parallel and doing that from Lambda. And I would say, frankly, if it is just doing few things, as in this case, it sounds, not like system to system talking a lot and so on, it may be as simple as putting step functions instead of Lambda, because that sounds to me like process orchestration task, where you would have that error handling and retries. It does not eliminate need for outbox, because you still need, let's say, after so many retries, you still need some place to journal what failed at a level that step functions couldn't handle it. But at least as a service that would help you to implement it, I would look at that process orchestration first.
That's excellent. Okay. All right. So we don't have more questions going on at the moment. So Tim, I wanted to kind of jump into some of the modules. We're here to talk about this workshop. I want to kind of see how this helps. Are you ready to share some modules with us?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I'm going to start from that diagram that I love so much that Luca built, because this is, when he was talking about those, modules of your app, not just the modules in the workshop, the idea of breaking the services in your application into these bounded contexts. And this is, this is how we're looking at this application, right? We've got different activities that you're doing, and this would have been one big, huge, app, but now it's pulled apart, and we can build it separately. We can scale it separately. We can have completely, different groups working on different things, which we even have going on internally, which is kind of brilliant. We've got different people who are working on different modules independently, because as long as they know they're the bounded context of the inputs and outputs, and they're like, yeah, I follow that contract, I can build this, which as an enterprise guy, I'm like, that's awesome. Because I also, if I were to drop into, and when I do, I get the privilege of dropping in early on the early releases, I don't have to come up to speed on the entire thing, right? I can just be like, okay, what's this thing gonna do? We were talking about step functions. I think, correct me if I'm wrong here, that's where we're going to introduce step functions in this orchestration search service thing, right?
Correct.
Yeah. And so the idea that step functions is a brilliant tool and service, but if I am working on the writer position service to track where writers are, and I'm dealing with some complexity there, I don't have to also know everything about step functions right then. I can work on that module, I can perfect that, and then, I can learn the step function stuff when I join that group. It's working on that. So I love that. And from here, so this synchronous with a single Lambda function, the thing that we're most familiar with, the synchronous request response model, that's where we jump on over into the workshop as the transition to show you these modules, where we've got synchronous invocation as a very, it's right at the top. In fact, in intro to serverless, if I look at the architecture here, this is a request response synchronous thing, right?
All right, I'm going to stop you there for a second.
Go for it.
Okay.
Yeah.
And we have quite a few people watching, and I'd say a lot of them know synchronous versus asynchronous. But talk to me, and Giedrius, if you want to, I'm going to throw this to you. Differentiate between synchronous and asynchronous and why it matters.
So in this particular example, you have some client application. We on purpose, we do not have any graphical user interface. We do not have web application. It's all command line. It's to make sure that, on one hand, it's hard to maintain. On the other hand, we don't want to go into kind of flame wars, which framework to use for your UI development and so on and so on. So everything is from command line. And going back to synchronous versus asynchronous, if you do not have anyone waiting and looking at that spinning wheel and in front of the screen, asynchronous will and then the fire and forget approach will make your life easier. Because one
Yep.
thing, if it's easier to scale, you do not overwhelm resources. If there is nobody waiting, if you can get that done a few seconds later, it's easier. So scaling, resiliency implementations, all that will be much easier if you go with the synchronous, with event-driven, versus I fire that message and I'm waiting for response while blocking execution. That approach, that synchronous approach, it's fine if you have graphical user interface and somebody waiting for that response. If you do not have to respond immediately, I would say as a go-to scenario, I would always check asynchronous first, or event-driven, or event streaming, depending on your context. Usual answer, it depends. But if you can avoid synchronous, because it's much harder to scale, it's much harder to keep context at hand and so on. When you are responding to that request, in many cases, you have to know about previous requests, so which means that you have to keep that session information somewhere and pull it on the fly and synchronize across multiple geos and whatnot. So to do that properly, it's much harder from my point of view.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you. That's great. I just want to make sure we understood why synchronous and why asynchronous, and I agree. Always go asynchronous first. Synchronous has its place, but asynchronous if you can. So, Tim, I'm going to turn it back over to you, but I just want to make sure we're clarifying. And we who live, eat, and sleep, this stuff, we tend to think, oh, everybody knows what we're talking about, but not Eric. Eric doesn't know. So
just one thing, Eric, before
Yeah,
we go back, to add on top of what Giedrius was saying. So for me, it's important also to challenge the status quo, because very often we have currently workloads that are synchronous in our organization, but they might be turned very quickly in asynchronous. And I remember when in my previous job as VP of architecture, we moved from a monolithic architecture to over 200 microservices overall. And very often we challenge this status quo that where we were thinking at the beginning, oh yes, it has to be synchronous, like for instance the consumption of gift code. But the reality is that just a portion has to be synchronous, the rest can be asynchronous, and that changed completely everything, cost-wise, maintenance-wise, and all the benefit that were highlighted before. I think it's very important very often to also not going too far or looking for where is the opportunity to move asynchronous, because sometimes it's exactly the API that we are working on right now. And it's very, very important that we also discuss with the product team in our organization and trying to or the customer, and discuss the possibility on how to slightly change a portion of the logic, and then makes the life easier for everyone in maintenance and scalability, how much you can grow, what you can cache, what you cannot cache, and so on and so forth. So I think very often it's not only applicable for new workloads, but also for existing ones that maybe is exactly the one we are writing and we are working on right now, that can be switched very quickly, carving out a portion of the logic in different, let's say, services, that makes our life way easier.
Yeah, great addition. I agree with you. Yeah, huge.
I'm inspired to pile on.
Please. Yeah. What do you got?
So again, as an enterprise architect in previous positions, anytime I would get to something that would be a long-running task, it would be where you go, oh crap, how do I deal with it? Because I know how to do, synchronous request responses, but when it was long-running, you'd be like, and now what? And you'd reach for a queue, right? Because you're like, well, I have to go ahead and offload this because I can't just make the user wait while I resize the image that they just uploaded into, a thumbnail and a small, medium, large, and maybe do some image recognition on it. And oh, you know what? I might even need to have a manual process that approves that uploaded image of their, face for a thing. And I go, oh my God, how do I architect for that? And over in serverless land, see what I did there? You can see how you can go ahead and actually, break that apart, add in the queue, because it's natural to actually have these queues and have things talking with events that happen, have something you drop into an S3, create an event that triggers a Lambda to do something, have a step function that orchestrates those manual interactions that are outside of the normal, method flows. All those things, I go, wow, that's fantastic. Because, and I got to admit, the most anticipated module for me is the asynchronous module. I cannot wait to get that published and out there, because I really, really find that to be a fantastic architectural component and pattern. The synchronous we've started with because, again, it's something we all do. I think everybody is familiar with that, and so it feels like you don't have to change as many paradigms. But the real value I see as an architect is like, oh, I really want to get that asynchronous flows going on. And Luca had mentioned how it really changes your mindset, because some of the things that I used to think were a synchronous request response, yes, it has to be, put it in my cart, that's got to be synchronous. No, it does not. That could be asynchronous. It's just got to fire and forget, say, hey, this one needs to go in the cart. And it gets there after it gets through some verification or whatnot. And then the cart gets updated, because the front end is no longer a static front end. It is polling. It is checking for stuff. It's, being updated in real time via WebSockets. And so, when that thing does complete, process a refund, process a refund, process a refund. You only want that to happen one time, right? You don't want to give your customer 3 refunds. And so if you've got item potency and you've got the ability to make sure that happens, well, that's a great architecture, and that's going to scale better. So yeah.
And to add to this one, problem is that front door, in most cases, it's still synchronous. Even, let's say, to kick off that refund or to add to the cart, you are calling synchronously, and that's where we're starting in that module. That okay, for most of the user interactions, you start with the synchronous request. You're sending that message, waiting to acknowledgement of that message. Do I need to retry it from application side? Okay, from that moment on, behind that API gateway in this case, it can be anything. As soon as client application got acknowledgement, okay, yeah, you asked to add that thing to the shopping cart, I'll do that. Meanwhile, rest assured, I'm working on it. So that's why we're starting with this synchronous approach, with kind of meat and potatoes of most of UI-driven applications, where you would have that in front. And it's in this particular case, we're talking about user management system, where you're adding user, removing user, checking user, and so on, and implemented in SAM and Python. Though one thing I didn't mention about this workshop, that what's coming next. We understand that not everyone likes SAM, or not everyone wants to have SAM in their production environments.
I want you to stop talking. That is just
but to be realistic, look, enterprise.
Everybody loves SAM.
Yeah, so what is coming for each of those modules? After SAM and Python, we're looking at CDK and TypeScript, we're looking at Terraform, we're looking at Java. Excellent. So variations of the same, basically the same module implemented in different languages using different infrastructure as code platforms, that's coming. So we're starting each of them as SAM and Python to make sure that Eric gets us on the screen, otherwise he would ignore us. And then from there on, we'll, once we have our foot in the door, we'll kind of go into different variations. Anyways, going back to the module. So it starts with SAM. It starts with the simple CRUD interface. Okay, we need to add records to the database. We need to make sure that those calls to the database are authenticated. So we have authentication, authorization. We have Cognito user pool, and Tim, here you are.
I want to interject and let it keep going. But here's one thing that I'm really I'm proud of. Well, not proud. That's not right. I love that in these modules we start with the data. There are so many of the things that are out there that start with, create your function to do the thing. And you're like, okay. Everything I've ever built always starts with the data. And so I love that in these modules and these workshops, we start with data, and they're like, okay, you have data. how do you get to the data? How do you manipulate the data? So I love that.
Take a minute, and I'll throw this at Luca for a sec. Why data first? Because I agree, and I have my reasons, but I'm curious of why you start with the data. And Tim, maybe I stole your thunder there, but yeah, I'm curious of why you all start with data.
The challenge usually when you have an architecture, starting the modeling phase, is looking at how you're going to, especially distributed system, how you're going to slice the system in order to make it easier. I think Tim was referring at the beginning of this session on the fact that we want to have a very small, or the smallest possible cognitive load for our teams. And therefore, in order to understand how this thing will be sliced, one of usually the step that you do is looking at how the data would look like, how the data will flow inside your system. And that part is helping you also to slice the system. Obviously, if you are in a bounded context dedicated to the user, probably you won't have all the information about the delivery or other things. You will have some references probably, or foreign keys, or depends how you're going to define that. But in general, what you are looking for is trying to create some cluster that represent your bounded context. And data is a good starting point, because that will tell you, when you're starting to model that, if you are in the right path or you're not. Because the moment that you start to when there is a request coming in and you make 5 synchronous calls across the system, that means 1 million requests coming in per second. It has to go to 5 different systems, and everything has to scale at the same time. Instead, if you define the data in a way that is, let's say, atomic, the request. So you go in one service, it has all the information needed. That could mean also that you have duplication of data that is not, let's say, a mystery in distributed system. I think is a very, very, let's say, important starting point when you are designing the system, because it's not just, I plug this service with the other service. That will come later, but you need to have clarity that the data that you're going to, let's say, map into the bounded context, and the way how the access pattern of your data is mimicking what you want to express on the front end, or wherever it is. It could be a browser, it could be another API.
Yeah.
That's why I think it's important that we highlight this part, because for better or worse, that will provide us the, let's say, the winning architecture at the end for our context.
I'm going to tell you that my answer is the same as yours, but not nearly as cool or with a cool accent. Yours is much more eloquent. Mine is like, because you got to know what you're doing with your data, But yeah, no, I absolutely agree with you. Access patterns, the data you're doing, what's secure, what's not, what's your security level on your data, things like that, very critical. All right, Tim, what's next? Next thing is the business logic, yeah? Or are you still on this data store?
Well, I'm still on. I'm so enamored of it, because here's the other benefit from a workshop standpoint, hands-on. You start with the data, and then we start to layer things onto that. And so you're successful at each step of the way, as opposed to starting with, framework du jour of the front end. And then, I can't connect to a thing until I have, an API gateway. Well, I can't do anything with API gateway until I have a Lambda. I can't do anything with that until, and you build the entire system, and you're like, well, if it works, and it's great, but if it doesn't, you're like, wow. But if you start from the back, you're like, okay, I have data. I know I have data. I have a structure, I can get to it. I know I can now write a function that gets data. Great. I can secure the function, and I have a secure function to get to the data. Now I can put a front end on the function that's secure to get to the data. And now it's academic to go ahead and say, you put whatever front end of choice on that, user interface front end. So I find that practical working backwards from the data to be, it helped me a lot in not having to be like, okay, did I get everything right? And at the very end, you press the button, and no, it didn't work. Instead, you get incremental wins.
Yeah, no, I totally understand.
And now I'm going to take back to Giedrius to go ahead and talk through the other parts, because this is just the tip of this, a lot of learning in here. And as you mentioned, Eric, the next step, there we go. Giedrius, take it away, or where we go, and I'll try and follow you.
just a time check real quick here. We got about 6 minutes, and then we've got some questions that I want to address, and then we're going to wrap up. But I want to make sure we did get the questions. So Giedrius, I turn it over to you.
Yeah, just we can talk until custom home about every single module and what we do there. But one thing what I would like to highlight is, or we haven't stressed it enough. You listen to Tim, you hear this passion in his voice when he talks about anything. So if you look at the text there, because text is a baby of Tim's there, all the narrative, all the explanations, you will read the same passion going there. So if you go through that, I really like that bar of content quality, of that narration quality that is in that workshop. I've seen a lot of workshops. I've worked on many of them and many of samples, but this is one of the few that really stand out when it comes to explanation quality, attention to details, kind of side explanations and so on.
Perfect.
Thank you so much for the shout out, Giedrius.
Yeah, it's good.
And now going back to the structure, so it goes through that typical process of how you start with the data, then add business logics, you add unit testing with mocking first, and then you add API in the front. After you test it and make sure that it works and you can do everything you need there, then next step, you secure it. So basically, again, going the same process step by step from the back to the front. Adding Cognito authorizer, it's not exactly Cognito authorizer. We're using Cognito as with the user pool as identity source, but we use Lambda authorizer that can be easily adjusted, and you can use Okta, you can use Ping Identity, you can use any third-party identity provider instead of Cognito. So it's pretty much JWT authorizer, not exactly Cognito. We just use Cognito as a service that issues this JWT for us. And then again, testing, end-to-end testing, and then we jump into observability. So now you have this one small microservice. That's one small thing. And that's where we start adding, okay, so how your dashboard will look like, how you will emit, let's say, using EMF, embedded metrics format, how you would be emitting metrics, business metrics, how you would know when something is wrong. So all that is built in, setting alarms. Let's say your read or write capacity limits are reached on DynamoDB, your concurrency limits reached on Lambda and so on. All that is in infrastructure as a code. You can just, whenever you hit deploy, it just SAM build, SAM deploy, you're done. You have everything out of the box. No need to go anywhere else. And then SAM pipelines as a dive deeper module where we go into how to build it end-to-end as a more enterprise grade stuff with all the pipelines that you need for testing, staging, approval, manual approval, step waiting for you, and so on.
All right. By show of hands in the room, how many of you used to build authentication at the very end? I'm guilty. Yeah. I love it.
Been there, done that.
Yeah. I love it. I mean, you literally get it built, ready to deploy. It's like, oh, we don't have authorization, authentication. I love it that you're building that in first. I love it that you're building observability in. How many times I've sat with the customer and said, what's your observability story? Well, we store our data. We store all our metrics. Great. What do you do with them? We store them. Okay, great. What are you setting up alarms? Are you letting your application tell you the story of how it's working? And I think that's one of the biggest things. And this isn't a serverless thing. This is an AWS thing. This is a developer thing. I think it's one of the last things we look at, and we do it out of necessity. But when we learn how to build it in from the beginning, it makes life a lot easier. So I love that you've taken this approach on that.
Especially when you do not do that by hand, when you do that in infrastructure as a code directly as part of your
That's
application.
Right. That's right, because you would only do it in SAM. So I totally understand that stuff.
Yeah.
You know what? Let me just set the record straight. I like CDK. I've really been digging Terraform lately. I'm actually doing some SAM Terraform integration stuff. So I'm not just SAM. And there probably won't be a squirrel at reInvent this year, and I'm not dancing off because I almost passed out last year. Just so y'all know. So Okay, so real quick, I want to get to a couple of questions and some statements that are coming in here. I want to go back a little bit, and I already answered, but just so other people see. So we had this question of where, reverse engineering question, is there a place where I can see different patterns implemented using AWS services? Well, I'm glad you asked. We actually, our team actually maintains a website called serverlessland.com. And then on there is patterns, and it is literally just that. Now, this is open source. We have folks that kick in a lot of these. Yeah, you can see it here. Thank you, Tim. A lot of stuff, and you filter it by what you want to do. You want service framework, Terraform, SAM, CDK, whatever, language, things like that. So there's a lot of things to give you the idea of what patterns are available. Generally, they're classified as from what service to what service. How do I do API gateway to Lambda? How do I do DynamoDB? Or how do I API gateway to DynamoDB? It is possible with VTL. It's not for the faint of heart, but it is pretty cool. So, so there's that. We also had a follow up, and I like this. Also, look into the serverless application lens of the well-architected framework. This is a great way to look at your applications. It's a good checklist to understand how do I secure, how do I make my application well-architected. So, and that's for the serverless lens. Great. Thanks. Okay. Yeah. Emo Girl Lover got it. All right. Emo Girl Lover. I got it. Boy, I destroyed that. I apologize for that. We have another question here. It says, EDJ Geek, I'm a frequent visitor. Great. Thanks for watching. I appreciate that. And I see it's focused on how to integrate different services. Yeah. But my question is more to do with a business problem. For example, I need to dedupe SQS messages, not use FIFO, or how to orchestrate services and so on. For this, there's a lot of learning in Service Land. I mean, we can try to jump into that. I don't know what time was, what we have. There's a lot of learning in Service Land that'll do that. Also, we have a lot of YouTube videos on this kind of thing. Deduping, this is going to be a shameless plug, but I actually do a presentation. I did a presentation last year at reInvent called Building Next-Gen Applications with Event-Driven Architecture. And in there, I talk about not necessarily deduping, but idempotency, how to build idempotent applications, which hopefully should reduce. I'm not going to say completely remove, because we never know how customers can act, but reduces that dedupe a lot. There's also you can have a Lambda as it's processing. There's some deduplication things that you can build in to help reduce that. But a lot of that information, reInvent presentations. I don't know, Luca, Giedrius, Tim, if you have any others you want to throw out there for this.
Go for it. You were saying something, Giedrius.
No, I was saying that idempotency implementation, as Eric mentioned, it's one of the future modules, though it's not around the corner. It's still in development. And for presentations at reInvent, for this particular pattern, for this particular workshop, come and see us. It's already in the on the list there. You can register for that as soon as registration for seats opens. And for learning, Tim did not click on that, but there are various guides on Serverless Land. It's really kind of not talked enough about resource that is available there. You have so many guides, so many paved paths, testing, development, API management, building, and so on. You just pick your level, you just pick which area you want to go, which services you want to look at. It's really, I would say, Eric, it's not advertised enough resource on Serverless Land.
On it. I'll get to it. Yeah, no, I agree with you. The workshops that are in there, the Serverless Espresso workshop, the Innovator Island, these are hands-on where you can walk through. We probably ought to add this one that you're doing, or we may already have it. I'm not sure. But yeah, no, that's a great one. All right, we have another question. Oh, go ahead, Luca.
Yeah, sorry. Before we stop talking about idempotency, one thing that we should shout out is Power Tools, because we have that implemented out of the box. You don't even have to understand how idempotency works, because I already solved it for you. And the other nice thing that probably we should shout out, considering now is public, thanks Aitor, that currently is becoming a team that is going to work only on Power Tools, and there are a lot of interesting things that are happening on that side. So probably you will see more of those patterns available on Power Tools. So if you're not using that library that is available in Java, C#, TypeScript, Python, and so on, it's better that you start looking into it, because it will drastically solve a gazillion of the challenges that you might face when you want to operationalize your workload using Lambda functions.
Yep, absolutely right. I think Alpaco's might. Oh no, you put the catalog in here. I just posted the link. First of all, I put the link to the catalog in a couple times, so you have it. I've also posted the link to Power Tools, so we have that. So another question we had, and I'll kind of answer this real quick, is, and y'all can throw into, is personal opinion question: do y'all prefer GraphQL or REST? Yes. Is GraphQL the future that they expected? Yeah, I think it's doing everything they expected, and I think we're going to see more coming. My personal opinion is right tool for right job, right? And so I don't think it's an only use this for everything and only use this for everything. If I need synchronous stuff going on, data that's data driven, sync to my front end, yeah, I'm going to go GraphQL. I'm going to take advantage of the app sync. That's not built into GraphQL. That's part of app sync, right? So I guess the question is, do we prefer AppSync or REST? AppSync is of course AWS's implementation that owns a lot of features around security, multiple endpoints, and then of course the syncing. So the other thing is, if you want your contract to kind of help with the client defines the contract of what it wants. That's very helpful. I can just get what I need. If you want to maintain that contract at the API, then that's REST. So there's different needs for different products, and that's really where I come down. So I can't tell you, yes, I like this over this. And this isn't I'm not doing a politically correct answer. This is my honest to goodness answer. Depends on what I'm doing. Depends on those access patterns that Luca talked about a while back. How am I accessing that data, and how do I need to be able to interact with that? And that's kind of where I live on that. If anybody else, we have about 2 minutes, and then I need to do some wrap up. So if anybody else wants to throw something in on that.
As I mentioned, shameless plug, come and see us at the reInvent.
Yeah. reInvent, if you're coming, I think Luca, you've got one, Giedrius, you've got one. Tim, are you speaking there?
I will be there for the workshop. I'm super excited to actually see customers in person and go through it.
Got the workshop coming. I have a couple sessions that I'm doing. So yes, come join us. I'm going to throw this up here real quick, just so you know, in October 26th, Music City Center, Nashville. If you're looking at this and go, what is this EDA stuff? Or how do I get better at EDA? Or who are the experts at EDA? They're going to be in Nashville on the 1st. I'm sorry, how you doing? I just throw dates out there. On the 26th, October 26th, 2023, we have EDA Day. You can scan the QR code to register, but check this out. I don't know if y'all saw this, but we just announced our keynote today. And it's, my slide got messed up a little bit. That works. You can still see it. Go to EDA Day, James Urquhart, which I'm pretty sure I'm destroying his name as well. And he can talk to me about that. But he literally wrote the book on flow patterns. Right. And he's going to be talking about some predictions that he made and where we're at, where the future is, what's keeping us from jumping over the edge, where we need, into EDA even more, and how to get through that. It's going to be a really cool keynote. If you haven't heard James speak, he's phenomenal. He is just, the godfather of EDA. I'm coining that right now, but so I encourage you to come check that out. With that, we have about 2 minutes. Tim, you have anything you want to throw out before we go?
I just appreciate the time here, Eric, to go ahead and talk with you and the gentleman here. And I got to say, I've been just floored by the technical expertise that has gone into the workshop. And it's brilliant stuff. I'm looking forward to publishing some more of those modules as soon as we can and getting them out there for folks.
Just keep coming back. You'll see them published.
Yep. All right, Luca, you have anything? I got a few seconds here.
Yeah, just one quick thing. So remember that we have all our workshop available on our website publicly, because very often I have these questions in my LinkedIn post saying where I can find workshop for AWS. There are all publicly available. You can take on your own account. You don't have to only come to AWS events. You can take wherever you want, at the comfort of your house, and be skilled up on AWS services.
Yep. All right. With that, we're going to have to say goodbye. I appreciate it. Thank you so much. Keep coming back. And gentlemen, I appreciate y'all being on the show. Thank you so much. It's very fascinating. I'm super excited about this workshop. Anytime we can give, and I do want to echo what Tim is saying. These guys are the experts, guys and gals here. They're building the product. They are the experts on the product. And so getting them in a room and asking them questions, take that chance anytime you can. So with that, I'm going to say bye. Thank you again. And we'll see you next week. And hopefully we'll see you at EDA Day. Have a good one.
Bye.
Bye.